a unified viscoplastopology model of aging, congestion, and survival, across biology, corporations, society, and evolution, number 1480, VPT Sharp 041, December 27, 2025. Gerald C. EclaireMD Foundation. Category: System Patterns. Preface: This article was not written to prove a formula, or to compete within any academic discipline. It was written to explain a pattern recognized through my own research work, one that has repeated itself across my entire life, across diverse systems, and across decades of personal observation. I did not arrive at this framework from theory alone. It emerged from observations and experiences. Over the past 50 years, I have worked inside complex systems that were expected to perform at extreme limits. Startup enterprises, high-tech semiconductor chips, Wall Street public company management, artificial intelligence, algorithms and platforms, and later, my own aging body under 9 times of life-threatening medical incidents. I observed how these systems succeeded, aged, congested, and eventually failed or survived. At some point, the similarities became impossible to ignore. A stiff blood vessel fails in the same way a rigid organization collapses. A person's life trajectory follows patterns similar to an empire's rise and decline. A congested semiconductor chip misses timing margins, just as a society fails to act in time. A species that is strong, but inflexible disappears in the same way a powerful empire eventually declines. These are not metaphors. They are expressions of the same mathematical structures and physical principles, operating across different domains with variety of scales. This paper is therefore qualitative by necessity. It is extremely difficult, and often impossible, to collect unified, quantitative data across biology, engineering, business, economics, society, and species evolution. Attempting to force precision where none is physically measurable would only create false confidence. Instead, this work focuses on geometry, data patterns, flow, pivot, timing, and accumulated stress-strain energy, the elements that remain consistent even when measurements differ. The goal of this article is not prediction or precision. It is pattern recognition. Once the shape of failure is recognized, prevention becomes possible. Once the mechanics of survival are understood, intelligence can replace brute force. I write this not as a detached observer, but as an active participant. Some of the systems described here failed. Some survived. I survived academic and professional failures many times, but I suffered from sickness tremendously over the past 32 years since 1994. After achieving conventional material success, including fame, power, and wealth, I can still remember deeply, and almost feel, the bitterness, worry, fear, anger, and regret tied to the process that led to my health outcomes, which were the result of my own ignorance and lack of health education. This is the deep reason behind my past 16 years of self-study and medical research. This framework did not emerge from success alone, but more from damage, rupture, recovery, and deep self-reflection. If this paper helps readers recognize stiffness before collapse, congestion before paralysis, or strain before rupture, then it has fulfilled its purpose. Introduction. Across my adult lifetime, my professional journey has moved through rigorous engineering training, 6 failed startups, semiconductor chip AI design, leadership in public corporations, the development of artificial intelligence, algorithms, and, more recently, 16 years of relentless and intensive medical research. This shift into medicine was born of necessity following multiple life-threatening illnesses, including a major stroke in June 2025. Over time, as I analyzed these seemingly disparate fields, I began to recognize a repeating and undeniable pattern. Systems that appear fundamentally different on the surface often fail in remarkably similar ways. Human blood vessels stiffen and eventually rupture. Successful multi-billion-dollar companies grow rigid and collapse under their own weight. Modern societies become congested with information and lose the practical ability to act or decide. Empires rise with vitality and later collapse into brittleness. Even in the natural world, strong and rigid species disappear, while weaker, but more adaptive ones survive across long evolutionary time. At first glance, these outcomes appear unrelated, belonging separately to biology, economics, technology, or history. Yet when examined through a framework of solid dynamic, stress-strain energy and fluid dynamics-based flow patterns, they exhibit the same underlying geometric evolution and connectivity patterns. This article proposes that aging, congestion, and survival across biological, corporate, societal, and evolutionary systems can be described using a single, unified viscoplastic stress-strain and topological geometry model. The core thesis is simple. Failure is rarely caused by a single isolated shock. Instead, it is the consequence of accumulated stiffness, rising internal friction, and the gradual loss of adaptive flow. Survival depends not on brute strength, but on intelligence-driven redistribution of stress. Corporate aging as a biological process. In medicine, Vascular aging is understood as a progressive loss of elasticity. Early in life, human arteries are highly elastic and possess the structural integrity to absorb large pressure fluctuations, while returning to their original shape. Over time, repeated metabolic stress produces micro damage within the vessel walls. This leads to calcification, reduced compliance, and physical stiffening. Eventually, the vessels reach a point where they can no longer absorb even normal pressure variations. At that stage, rupture occurs and the biological system fails. Successful companies follow this same biological trajectory. In their early stages, startups are naturally flexible. Their organizational vessels are clear and elastic. Decision loops are short, communication is direct, and adaptation is rapid. When market stress appears, the company bends, adjusts, and recovers its functional shape. As a company grows, however, its internal structure begins to harden. Layers of middle management, complex hierarchies, and administrative rules accumulate. Like plaque in an artery, decision latency increases as the system enters what I describe as a viscoplastic phase. In this phase, the organization continues to function and flow, but it does so more slowly and with substantially increased internal friction. Take a high-tech company as an example. When leadership shifts from a founding technologist or engineer to a political operator, or an MBA bean counter, decline usually follows. In the late stages of corporate life, the organization becomes truly stiff. At this point, even small external shocks, such as modest market shifts, a new competitor, or a minor regulatory change, can cause disproportionate damage. What a younger and more elastic company would have absorbed with ease, now produces catastrophic structural failure. This is not a moral failure or a defect of leadership intent. It is a mechanical consequence of aging systems. Just as arteries fail after decades of accumulated stress, corporations fail after decades of accumulated rigidity. Corporate collapse is not an external attack. It is a rupture in a system that has lost its ability to flow. Neural congestion and the timing failure of society. At the societal level, a different but closely related failure mode appears. Modern societies rarely collapse because of insufficient information. Instead, they fail to act despite, and often, because of, an overwhelming excess of information mixed with noise. Therefore, whether AI is a blessing or a curse for today's society is still too early to tell. Here, my background in semiconductor design provides a critical analogy. In advanced semiconductor chip design, the primary limitation is no longer the capability of individual transistors. Instead, designers encounter a wall, caused by routing congestion and timing failure. As chips grow more complex, signals begin to interfere with one another. If a signal arrives at a node, even a fraction of a nanosecond too late, the entire operation can fail. From my 12 years of working experience in semiconductor IC chip design, I learned that routing wires is far more difficult than placing transistors. This explains why, by 2025, the most advanced AI chips have transistor counts of around 80 billion, approaching the number of neurons in a newborn baby, estimated at about 86 billion. Yet the number of routing wires on these chips remains only a very small fraction of the neural pathways present in a baby's brain. From birth to about age 5, a child's brain forms neural connections at an extraordinary rate, reaching up to about 1 million new connections per second during peak development. The same phenomenon is now visible in human society. In this analogy, individual humans function as transistors. Communication channels such as the internet, fiber optics, and social media act as routing wires. Social media platforms form extremely dense interconnect layers. In this system, human attention becomes the limiting resource. As routing density increases, signals interfere, noise rises, and meaningful signal-to-noise ratios collapse. Timing coherence is lost. Even when accurate and critical information exists, it fails to produce coordinated action because it arrives fragmented, delayed, or emotionally amplified beyond the system's processing capacity. The result is societal neural congestion. Polarization increases because the system can no longer synchronize its components. Collective decision-making slows dramatically. This is not a failure of individual intelligence. It is a system-level timing violation. Just as in a congested microchip, when flow exceeds capacity, the intelligence of the system can no longer be expressed effectively. Strength versus intelligence as a survival strategy. Evolution provides the clearest demonstration of why intelligence matters. More than strength, strength-led systems rely on resistance. They meet stress head-on, using mass and rigidity to withstand pressure. This strategy works only until stress exceeds material limits. Once that threshold is crossed, failure is sudden, brittle, and irreversible. Intelligence-led systems behave differently. They predict, reroute, and adapt. Instead of resisting stress, they redistribute it across time and space. By lowering the effective strain rate at any single point, they delay or prevent rupture. Humans have survived not because we are the strongest or fastest species, but because we can coordinate, plan, and adapt. Intelligence allows us to avoid brute force traps. This is why pork and beef are served on human dining tables, and not the other way around. The animals we consume are often physically stronger, but they lack intelligence-driven flow control, including innovation and adaptability, to outmaneuver their environment. This same principle applies directly to my own post-stroke recovery. Recovery did not occur through force or sheer intensity of effort. It occurred through careful coordination, such as increasing sleep while reducing exercise, pacing energy, and the gradual rerouting of neural pathways through neuroplasticity. I had to respect the limits of a stiffened system, and use intelligence to replace brute strength. A unified stress-strain framework. Across every domain I have studied, the pattern is consistent, and pattern recognition is the central theme. Systems begin in an elastic phase where stress is absorbed, and recovery is rapid. Over time, they enter a viscoplastic phase where flow continues, but internal friction increases and damage accumulates quietly. Eventually, stiffness dominates. The system loses its geometric capacity to redistribute stress, making rupture inevitable. Failure occurs when the rate of strain accumulation exceeds the rate of adaptation. Survival occurs when intelligence reduces the effective strain rate. This explains why healthy-looking vessels rupture under normal blood pressure, why experienced and successful companies collapse suddenly, why societies with the most data often become the most paralyzed, and why the strongest species are frequently the first to disappear during environmental change. The difference between survival and failure is not resources, intent, or physical power, but the ability to control flow and recognize approaching, turning and breaking points, systemic blindness and the cost of ignoring slow signals. Across biology, society, corporations, and medicine, collapse rarely occurs because warning signs are absent. It occurs because slow signals are consistently ignored. Health is no exception. Empires fall, corporate bankrupt, species disappear, and chronic diseases progress for the same fundamental reason. Gradual change is difficult for human beings and systems to perceive, accept, and even harder to respond to. Human cognition is optimized for acute threats, not for slow accumulation. When damage develops incrementally, it is normalized, rationalized, deferred, or ignored. By the time failure becomes visible, the system has already crossed an irreversible threshold. Collapse then appears sudden, even though its causes were present for years, decades, or centuries. My research is directed at this form of systemic blindness. Rather than focusing on events at the moment of rupture, I examine long-term trajectories, strain change rate of time, and cumulative energy accumulation that precede failure. This approach applies equally to biological systems, the fate of empires, business development, healthcare structures and industries, and human decision-making processes. Science, when practiced honestly, does not lie. It does not exist to protect comfort, authority, profit, or establish narratives. Its role is to reveal what accumulates, what gradually deforms, and what eventually fails. When truth becomes uncomfortable, it is often human systems that soften the message, or look away, not science itself. People may twist or sugarcoat their spoken or written language, but scientifically proven numbers do not lie. The purpose of this work is not criticism, but visibility. Making slow signals visible is the only way. Complex systems can adapt before collapse becomes inevitable. This is the spirit of my research. Conclusion: this unified stress-strain synergy and topological geometry model does not attempt to reduce the human experience to cold mechanics. Instead, it reveals the physical and mathematical reason why compassion, intelligence, and adaptation are essential for survival. Intelligence is not an abstract or philosophical virtue. It is a fundamental survival mechanism. It allows systems to redistribute stress, preserve internal timing, and avoid the brittleness of age. Aging is not a moral failure, and congestion is not a sign of stupidity. They are predictable outcomes that occur when stiffness exceeds adaptability. Across biology, corporations, societies, and the long arc of evolution, the lesson remains the same. Survival does not belong to the strongest system, but to the one that retains elasticity and the ability to flow. Disclaimer: I write this article not for fame, but to share what I have learned, so others can understand complex systems, prevent failure, and live better lives. This content is provided for educational reference only, and does not constitute medical advice. No doctor-patient relationship is created. You may share this article freely, but it must not be altered, edited, or republished as your own. All intellectual property rights and copyrights belong to the author. Gerald C.